Economically, however, the US was much stronger, and as you move away from World War II and into the 60s and 70s, you started to see the difference. Let me see if this magic wand works. That's amazing. Excellent. So here's percent of world GDP, and what you can see is the United States consistently sits around 25 to 30%. And this period goes all the way to the present, so you can see the decline in the Russians over time following and leading to their collapse. So the Soviets had originally around 15%, it then went down to 5%, and that was right before the Soviet Union collapsed into bankruptcy and broke apart. But despite having a smaller population and significantly fewer people in our active duty forces, the United States was able to stay pace because we applied all sectors of our economy to the challenge of this global competition. We worked with our allies and partners to deter, and we had what the Soviet Union did not, which is a commercial, innovative defense industrial base, private sector defense industrial base that could partner with DoD and field some of the most advanced systems in the world that allowed us to overcome the numerical differences. As a result, we remained ahead technologically and outpaced and deterred the USSR. Our nuclear deterrence, assured through the nuclear triad, was an essential cornerstone of preserving that deterrence, of keeping that conflict from going violent or going nuclear, and it was one component of our defense against the Soviets that we had from the start. As the Cold War progressed, with the stronger economy, the US was able to actually contribute decreasing percentages of its GDP to defense. We were at one point 50% of all federal spending on defense. We're now about 15%, a little lower. At one point, we were around 9 or 10% of GDP of our total economy on defense. We're now closer to 3.2. That has been a gradual process the whole way along. But the Soviet Union, just to keep pace because of our technology and advantages with our private sector, kept spending increasingly larger shares of its money on defense, eventually driving itself under and breaking up. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there went our peer competitor. The United States took advantage of this opportunity. We reduced our force structure, dialed back our research, and enjoyed the peace dividend. But following Russia's decline, as the US dealt with counterterrorism challenges, the People's Republic of China rapidly grew both economically and militarily. The PRC is different from the USSR in a number of different ways, but they have some disturbing similarities. Both communist countries, both very hostile to democratic regimes. You saw what happened when they did not like the voting that was going on in Hong Kong, and they just moved in and changed that. We worried that the Soviets had more people than the United States because they had 40 million more people. The Chinese are larger by 1 billion, order of magnitude difference. Additionally, while the US always had a larger GDP advantage than the USSR, and the USSR was shrinking during this whole period, China's on a different path. That's China's GDP. So while it started very low, as they moved to open up and engage in more trade, their economy has been growing. And where it was once only 15% of our GDP, it now is either smaller or larger, depending on how you like to do math. So if you do what's called straight up on the value of things that produce based on the dollars they cost, the United States is a larger economy. If you do it off of what's called purchasing power parity, where you say, what do you get for that amount, where labor differences become very pronounced in cost, there's an analyst who will tell you that the Chinese economy is larger. And you can see this in things like shipbuilding and others, where because of their lower labor costs, they're able to produce things in volume. So whichever way you like to do your economics, you can do it as purchasing power parity or straight up dollar value. The short answer is we're dealing with a peer competitor, a country who is closer to us in economic capability and larger than us in population that we did not face with the Soviet Union, and frankly did not face with Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. In both of those cases, we were dealing with countries that we could, even though we showed up late to the fight, overwhelm them with numbers and volume and eventually prevail. So here's an example of a production challenge, and I will use steel. The US and the Soviets at the time originally produced both similar amounts of the world's steel. I think that's 20% if I got the chart right. The US declined over time as we shifted some of those production facilities as those closed down and other competitors came in, and then you can see the abrupt collapse. But in each case, we weren't that far apart. This is China. We produce less than 5% of the world's steel, and China produces 50% of the world's steel. It would be very awkward to be in a shipbuilding race with somebody who has 50% of the world's steel. So the point here is and then let me just go one more point, which is as their economy has grown, their defense spending has grown. And you can see the trajectory as the US has gone up and down over time of the Chinese closing the gap. Other areas they have made investments in their Navy. US ships are still larger and more capable, and that now China has more of them. The bigger concern is that China is one of the largest ship-producing countries in the world, and so their ability to close that gap is growing, while at the same time, the United States is struggling to produce 2 Virginia-class submarines a year. I think we're at 1.2, and there's more money put in the budget to try and increase that, and we'll talk some about those challenges. Now, I should stop here, because I realize I have painted a very dark picture of the challenge of the rise in China and everything else, and I should highlight a couple of things. First of all, they have their weaknesses, not least of which is they're communists. So they think that central planning is the best way to solve problems, and as most of us discovered, if everything was done out of a central site, it tends not to work as well. Free markets, competition, innovation tends to work better. In the long run, it's how we outpace the Soviets. They will continue to have that disadvantage. They're not as vulnerable as the Soviets were because they have a large export market, so they do have to compete internationally, but still that's how they function. The second is that we have a number of advantages as the United States that they do not have and cannot have. The first is, as mentioned before, allies and partners. Over 50% of the world's GDP is either the United States or our formal allies and partners. The world is interested, the world has a large number of democracies interested in trade, interested in international cooperation, who are happy to team with us. If you tried to write down every country that was happy to team with China, you wouldn't need all the fingers on one hand to be able to get there. They have client states, they have countries they can intimidate. They do not have the same set of formal allies and partners that we do. The second is non-commissioned officers. Do not underestimate the value of the non-commissioned officer corps to the way our military can operate. If you want to see the difference, watch the opening videos of the Russian invasion of Ukraine where they had traffic jams. And the traffic jams occurred with military vehicles unable to get around each other until a general officer showed up. Imagine a US military base with a traffic jam that waited for a general officer to show up. The sergeant major would have long since sorted it out, right? There's this whole notion of taking initiative and moving out. If you're a country that does not trust your population, you don't do that. But if you're a country like the United States that's willing to empower your non-commissioned officer corps, they will make decisions off of commander's intent in the heat of the moment that allows us to function differently than other nations do. And our troops fight differently, and they can command and operate differently because of that trust, because of their skill level and that training. So it was mentioned earlier by general allies and partners, and you particularly emphasized the NCOs, and I would completely agree and not want to underestimate or have you forget that key value, because it does affect our future warfighting strategies and doctrines when you know you can do that. The third is we have an innovative industrial base. We have companies every day producing new technologies and innovations. Look, I worked in the Pentagon multiple times. I love the Pentagon, great people in it. But if every good idea or every weapon system had to be thought of inside the Pentagon and then command controlled out to the field and say, we have decided what we need, you must build this, we're not going to get there. And we would never be in the place we are now. What strengthens us is all day long throughout the country, people are inventing really cool things. And in many cases, particularly in space, the Defense Department is just trying to keep up, to try and bring in all that innovation and cool ideas and take advantage of it to strengthen our national security. So don't forget, those three are very important advantages. And if you're into demographics, the Chinese decided to shoot themselves in the foot with the One China policy. They have 1.3 billion people on their way down to 800 million, right? They keep declining in their population size, and their birth rates are very low. So even though you can, in theory, turn that around in the future, the people you're going to have 50 years from now retired are the ones you already have. So there's a trend that they have tracked themselves into. Now, our nation has not been blind to these sort of trends and patterns from China and the difficulties and the risk that creates to our country. We've had the 2018 National Defense Strategy, which came out of the Trump administration, and the 2022 National Defense Strategy that came out in the Biden administration. Both of them are amazingly very similar, which is unusual because if you watch the TV news, there's very little that they seem to be able to agree on in Washington, D.C. But the two political parties, two different teams, two different administrations, very similar description of the challenge. 2018 highlighted China as a strategic competitor using predatory economics to intimidate its neighbors while militarizing features in the South China Sea. In similar fashion, 2022 NDS described as key priority deterring aggression while being prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary, prioritizing the PRC challenge in the Indo-Pacific and the Russian challenge in Europe. I should point out, one of the reasons we try to make sure we emphasize the People's Republic of China is, as mentioned before, the issue is not with the Chinese people, it's with their communist government, and in a structure that is very different than ours. Their military does not report to their government. Their military reports to the political party, because its job and its existence is to defend the Communist Party of China, not to defend its population. It's just an interesting structural difference. Luckily, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats field their own individual nuclear force. That's very useful. Though that really would help out. You could field a whole set of fields, each party got its own one, but that's how the Chinese are set up. And it shows you that their priority is the protection of the party as its first and primary responsibility. So two different administrations, two different political parties, same conclusion. You also saw this in a recent vote in Congress, bipartisan vote that wasn't just about aid to Ukraine, but about aid to the industrial base to increase our production of submarines and assistance to Taiwan to allow it to resist and deter aggression. So common understanding from both parties based on the data, based on the trends, and based on the patterns of behavior that we have seen that the People's Republic of China is now our pacing threat. But it's not just steel and ships. The PRC is taking steps to build their own very formidable, very modern nuclear arsenal. So current DoD reports estimate that the PRC possesses more than 500 operational nuclear warheads. As of May 2023, they're on track, as of May 2023, they're on track to have 1,000 by 2030, and another speaker, I think, pointed out 1,500 by 2035. This creates a challenge for us. One, it's very different when you have to deal with a nuclear state, but more importantly, it's very different when you have to deal with two very large nuclear states, and you have to be able to deter them both, which means you cannot allow the deterrence of one to so consume you that you have nothing left to deter the other, and therefore you have to fold. But while the pacing challenges have changed, the fundamentals of deterrence remain the same, which is you have a nuclear deterrent to convince the other player that this is not the path to take. And you move it down the scale, so maybe it's conventional, or if you have the right conventional force, they go to what's called gray zone. Gray zone is when you're driving and the kids in the back seat are kicking each other under the table, and when you turn around, everyone goes, what? What? Doesn't mean mom. Right? Those are gray zone conflicts going on every day. People stealing your intellectual property rights, property through cyber attacks, people doing disruptive operations on each other. It's unfortunate, but it's vastly better than a conventional war and vastly superior to a nuclear exchange. So kudos for keeping the peace, pushing it down the nuclear scale. Conventional forces push it down lower, and then you get yourself into the gray zone fight, or even better, the economic sphere. And we have seen a number of actions by China in the economic sphere to either dominate a certain industry or to take advantages of certain standards in the international community that they try and set. But as a nation like the United States, we'd much rather compete with someone on economics and trade and our capacity to produce better and more interesting things than them, and we will generally win in that race. And it's a lot less violent. The challenge we have is our Triad is old, and we waited too long to modernize. I think if you look in the book, it pointed out that the Minuteman was designed to take you through 1980, and then it was assumed it would have been replaced. So whoever built it had a really good job of building over specified, because that's thing's been around for decades beyond. And so the challenge is we have lost the margin of being able to, when can we field the next generation? We have to keep those coming. Part of the reason you're seeing the issue with the Virginia-class submarine is that the priority is put on the Columbia, to try and keep the Columbia on schedule. They're moving workers. Now, I recognize you have 2 of the 3 legs of the Triad. I know there are plans to widen the rivers here so you can get a Columbia submarine up. That will give you all 3 legs. Excellent. Well done. No one will look for them here, and that will have all 3 bases covered. I know we have folks coming in, they're going to talk about Sentinel and others. But the challenge we have is we face a strategic competitor who is larger and stronger than those we have faced in the past. It means that while we have the same some advantages over communist China, there are others we don't. Our innovative industrial base is one, and to ensure we have a competitive advantage and the ability to dominate across domains in the different phases of conflict, we need to take full advantage of our innovative industrial base. And so I work for an association called the National Defense Industrial Association. We predominantly run events. We mostly bring forums together. We're happy to participate in ones like this where people, private citizens, industry, and the government can talk to each other in order to share ideas. Because it's amazing how often there is a limited understanding in the private sector about what the problems are that the Defense Department has and what it needs, and how little understanding there is sometimes in the Defense Department about what has already been solved in the private sector. So when I was in government, if somebody from industry wanted to meet with me, the lawyers would say, well, you could meet with them, but if you meet with one company, you have to be willing to meet with all of them. And you don't have a schedule for that. You're like, okay, I'll go back to office. Right. Well, that's the wrong answer, right? And so what NDIA does is they say, you come and speak on the issue you care about. We will open the doors and invite people in. The industries who care can show up. It wasn't your call. They decided, and the lawyers get happy. So those are the sort of things that we do. You're all welcome to be members and come join us. In order to stay informed on, and we put out a National Defense magazine that covers key issues. But the goal of all of this is increased communication to take advantage of one of our most important abilities, which is the talent and innovation of our people. And that's why events like this one are so important. Now, what I wanted to do, having covered that sweeping, take you through Cold War all the way to the present, is talk about 3 reports that have come out that you should be aware of. I'll go into a little bit about each one. I'll talk to you about where you can find them. That way that you can dive in detail. So the first one is our organization produces a report every year called Vital Signs. Jen Stewart, who's sitting right here, is the lead for it and the brainchild behind it. The first one we did, the one we did last year in 2023, the main takeaway of the analysis is she did, and it includes a survey, by the way, in 2023 of a very large number of our companies, and asked them questions about it, which is, our defense industrial base is not sized for great power competition. Our defense industrial base is sized for the post-Cold War drawdown. And it reflected the changes. So we used to have 3 million people who worked in the defense industrial base. We now have 1.1. We lost 17,000 companies in the last 5 years. The Defense Department estimates 40% of the small businesses that work with DoD have stopped doing business with DoD in the last 10 years. In the 1980s, we spent 5.8% of our budget on GDP on defense, and we're now down to 3.2 of our GDP. And we've done terrible things with the predictability of our CRs disrupting operations. So you get limited surge capacity. There are many, so that was the finding. The Defense Department then issued its National Defense Industrial Strategy. Do I need to wrap up? Okay. So first one is Vital Signs. You'll find it on our webpage. There's a 2023 and a 2024. I'll talk about 2024 in a second. The Defense Department issued a National Defense Industrial Strategy where they talk about the long-term priorities, resilient supply chain, workforce readiness. There are a number of issues with having the right skilled workforce here, flexible acquisition, and then economic deterrence. One of the things we talked about with CFIUS, one of the priorities is trying to protect that. As a follow-up, we did the 2024 Vital Signs. Go to the NDIA website for that. And that highlights that while there are many good things like the study that the department is doing, those are pushing on the accelerator. At the same time, we've got folks standing on the brakes with things like encouraging non-traditional companies to work with government, and then saying we want access to your IP rights, which for many companies is the company, and you created a deterrent to play. So those are the two. I'll give you one last one to pay attention to. I also had the opportunity to be on a commission. It was the PPBS commission that looked at the budget process, which said, aside from all these economic challenges, what's wrong with the budget process? And I'll just highlight one example. We traditionally go for research, procurement, operate, maintain. And we have different, we call colors of money, and different laws that apply in different pots of money. And then somebody produces software, and they say, what color of money should I use? We're like, well, is it for maintenance? And I say, well, it's got some capability upgrade. And so you'll see this in one of the challenges with the Triad is when you get to the future, you're in maintenance stage, but many of those are capability upgrades, and somebody has to decide whether it's already procurement. So we recommend, among many other changes, use the color of money, use the authority of the fund you're in for software upgrades. Don't try and trap yourself into an industrial model of steel bending where things were either research or procurement or maintenance. And we also recommended things like getting rid of use it or lose it, which is a wonderful feature of government, where if you don't spend your money by 30 September, it goes away, so everybody rushes to spend their money by 30 September versus carrying it over. So 3 studies, great reading. I encourage you all to do it. Overview, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to be around for the day, so we can take questions separately, or is there time for one here? I think we're tight for time, right? Okay, so what I'll do is, if you want to, those of you who do not like raising your hands for questions can then just mug me afterwards, and I will field your questions. It's one of the things you learn is that there are people who will raise their hand and there are people who won't, and if you don't invite them both, then you only hear from one community. So I will talk to the other half of you who do not. But I have a distinct honor now to move beyond this and introduce Admiral Weisskopf. He's going to be the next speaker. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy after spending 36 years in the Navy, rising to the rank of 3-star admiral. Since participating in the 3rd Taiwan Strait crisis in 1996 as a destroyer commanding officer, later head of the White House Situation Room, and as a carrier strike group commander. He's been a keen China observer. As 52nd president of the U.S. Naval War College, he was responsible for extensive wargaming, research, and exercises of all kinds, and his last active duty assignment was Naval Inspector General. Most recently, he served as Vice Chancellor for the Strategy and Strategic Engagement for the North Dakota University System. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Weisskopf.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Weisskopf, and I recognize many of you. You might not recognize me, okay? But I worked with Chancellor Hager at the university system for 3 years, and I live in Bismarck. So all the speakers flying in from all over the country, and I drove up from Bismarck. But man, that wind. It was tough. It was tough. So, my Uncle David was a sack pilot back in the 1950s, and he flew out of North Dakota. And so I've heard about places like Minot and Grand Forks literally all my life. But let me start my remarks here and see if I can get my slides going here. Okay. Good. So I'm going to talk about China, okay? I'm going to talk about China, but first, to piggyback on what Mr. Norquest said, you can build, a famous naval officer from the Royal Navy once said, you can't build a fleet with a supplemental budget. All this stuff takes time, okay? And the construction and all those kind of things. And I saw that growing up as a naval officer. Okay? I came in the Navy in 1977, and I watched as the Iranians took our hostages, and there were 3 ships in the Persian Gulf, and none of us could do anything. Okay? And And then I saw again as the Iranians were acting up in the late 80s, and we had new ships, and we had Aegis, and we had AWACS, and we had Tomahawks, and we had all kinds of things. I was a personal beneficiary of seeing what happens when we invest over the long term. So, hey, does anyone here speak Mandarin? Okay, one. Okay, good. Because I don't, okay. but I'm actually I put two characters up there that I think you'll find interesting. Okay. Frank Miller spoke here last year. I worked with Frank Miller when I was in the situation. One of the things he said, as I watched his remarks, I like Frank a lot, is that the Triad is in use daily. In use daily. I mean, it's not back in the back room, waiting, for things to happen. No, it's in use daily, and the general pointed that out. So I put my slides together, okay, about a week ago, and last Friday down at Whiteman, we did an elephant walk of the bombers, okay, half the bombers, okay, and down in Missouri, and that means, and you had it on your slide where it shows them all lined up there, and it's like, hey, if that isn't a message to anyone, reinforce our allies, warn our adversaries. And we used to say that about aircraft carriers. If a U.S. naval aircraft carrier shows up off your coast in the morning, that's one of two things. That's either great news, okay, we provided, humanitarian assistance and all kinds of things, or for our adversaries, this is really bad news. That you've got an aircraft carrier off your coast because of what you can do. So that's me. That's Ronald Reagan. I was flag officer in charge of the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group out in the Pacific. The Navy did an interesting thing, as services are wont to do. I was an Olmsted scholar after I graduated from the Naval Academy, and I went and I studied 2 years in France, in Strasbourg. This was during the Cold War. I took the French military training in Berlin and those kind of things, okay? And I was studying, Russia and those in the Cold War. And then I was at NATO headquarters, okay? 15 years later, some more Europe. And when I made Admiral, where do you think they sent me? Korea. Okay? Now, the good news is I have been starting to make deployments out there, so I was pretty comfortable. But at the same time, it was a shock to me to be sent out into Asia. Our 10-year-old son, like 5 kids, 10-year-old son used to wake up in the morning and say, "Dad, we live in Asia." and he got it. He really did. He got it. So, reading assignments, okay? We've all given reading assignments. All speakers have given reading assignments. And these are 2 annual threat assessments, unclassified. One came out from the intelligence community, and one came out from the Department of Defense, okay? And really within the last several months, okay? And it's very interesting reading. Now, I could stand up here and tell you, I could read some of the things. But what you need to know is China has a national strategy. Their national strategy is rejuvenation of the state by 2049. Now, what's important about 2049? It's the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China taking over the country. Okay, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the army and things like that. So we're always watching those kinds of things, okay, because that matters. And the other thing I thought was interesting, and everyone doesn't know this, okay, is that there are 2 legs of the Triad here in Minot. I mean, there are people who are very familiar with inside the Beltway and things like that, but they don't know you got 2 of the legs of the Triad here. Pretty basic knowledge. I mean, everybody here knows that, everybody in the room knows that, okay? But that goes back to Mr. Norquest talking, got to get the word out on those kind of things, just so it becomes common knowledge. Location, 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 and we're in the center of North America here. Although there are 2 cities that discuss which is the actual center. There is center for out-of-towners. There's center, but there's also rugby. Okay? And so in the end, it's not an accident that there are more private planes that fly through this area than anywhere in the United States, because the Earth is round. So these two studies, okay, they're online. You can get them in my notes of my slides, I got the links. So it's kind of hard to see. In 1988, I was an action officer in the Pentagon, okay, which Mr. Norquest knows is referred to as the building, okay, we call it the building. And I was a lieutenant commander, young officer. And Bill Crow was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He went over to Russia, 1988, okay, he went over to Russia, and he met with Marshal Akrameyev, okay, who was their head of military. And he brought this map back, okay, he brought this map back. And as you can see, it lists, it's Akrameyev's map of all the American forces all around. As you can see, you got to look through those words there, okay, you can see that really is the culmination of containment. You can see it right there. Now, that lesson, okay, is certainly not lost on the Chinese. Okay, and that's why I say, hey, geography really does matter. So, this is an unusual map, okay? Well, this app that you can get on the internet, okay, you can move the globe however you want, okay? When I was in Korea, they actually had a painting in the headquarters in Daejeon, which is their Pentagon equivalent, and it showed the world viewed from Korea. Now, as you can see, if you're sitting in Beijing, you're looking south, okay? You're looking east, okay? And that's what the world looks like. And as you can see, they're part of the Asian landmass, so you can see all that, okay? And it's just an interesting thing, but it shows you, you try to get, and this is what I spent my time doing as a commander in the Navy, thinking, how's the other guy think? So geography does matter, all right? It's a long way away, China, and the Pacific is a big ocean. Now let me tell you, I took a note before I came up here. The General Frank Bresson, okay, heard that? It's in the news. It's an Army dock ship, okay, that they're going to use to create the pier in Gaza to replenish and everything like that. Well, they left on March the 9th from Norfolk. April 5th, they arrived in the Mediterranean. And April 17th, they're in Crete. Okay, now it doesn't take the 5th to the 17th to get to Crete, okay, but my point is, normally, it takes a combatant ship about a week to go across the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean, right, because we go at high speeds. But as my Air Force colleagues would say, a lot of things in the Navy don't happen that fast, okay? In fact, they make fun of us when they say awfully slow warfare for anti-submarine warfare. And so, but the point is, all this stuff matters. It's a big ocean. Now, the other part of this is the alliance structure in the Pacific doesn't work the same as NATO. We have lots of bilateral agreements, bilateral with Japan, bilateral with Korea, bilateral with the Philippines, okay, and we're kind of the centerpiece. And recently we made an agreement with the UK and Australia, okay, for the Australians. But as you can see, hey, big ocean. And in the end, and then I want to show you here later, okay, is that our two countries, China and the United States, our geography matters. And of course, I don't have to tell you all, things are pretty unsettled right now in the world. In fact, I put my slides together last Friday, or a week ago, the elephant walk happens, but what else happens? We got a big exercise going on in this South China Sea. Okay? We learned that China has a post that they're establishing in Antigua, right? As well as one they already have down in Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, down in the south. So things are happening. Things are continually evolving. On the other hand, people are already starting to evaluate whether or not the partnership without limits is going to last. So all that, it's in the news like literally right now since I put my slides together. So as you can see, it's a pretty interesting time. So here's the man, okay? And in the end, as you can see, the Seventh Fleet operates out of Japan primarily, okay? But this is an area that the U.S. Navy is pretty familiar with. Having fought in World War II, you can see Taiwan down in the south there, okay? But this is, when you talk to a naval person about China, this is what we think. And of course, I lived in Korea for 2 years. And I got a slide I can show you, okay, if you're interested. That little island underneath South Korea, there's an island right off the coast there called Jeju Island. Okay? Now, the South Koreans built a huge carrier pier in Busan, which is on the mainland there, right? And as I left Korea, they were getting ready to build one on Jeju Island. Now, Jeju Island, okay, is, well, let me put it, if you were to go from Minot down to Deadwood, South Dakota, all right, we're down 85, that's the distance there. It's not that far away. And now we can bring our aircraft carriers and our nuclear submarines and all that to a very nice base built to spec, okay, on Jeju Island. Very controversial inside Korea, okay, for a variety of reasons. But the point is that geography does matter, okay. And of course, that was viewed, by the Chinese as, what are these things doing here? So here's a potential flashpoint. You may have heard of, you may not have heard of the Senkaku Islands. Now the Chinese call them Diaoyu Islands. Okay, they get a different name for them because they're disputed. And if you look, they're right off the coast, and they're right northeast of Taiwan. Now, the United States does these bilateral agreements, okay, because in the end, there are islands in between Japan and Korea, both now allies since the Second World War, okay, and they're disputed. I mean, it's a very emotional issue in Korea, okay, and the Koreans call it Dokdo Island, right? Well, the Japanese call them Takashima. So what does the United States call them? Well, we're not getting in the middle of that. We call them lean court rocks. Okay, and so in the end, I've seen things heat up pretty fast between our allies over there. So all that to say is the alliance mechanics work very differently. Now you've seen in the last 2 weeks our diplomacy in action. Okay, the president had a summit with the Japanese prime minister and the Philippine president. And he's beefing up our alliances out there with Australia and like so. So back to Marshall Acramayo's chart. We're not idle. You're not idle out there. So here is when you talk about the South China Sea, all right, it gets really complicated, okay, and of course the United States. What's the international waters? But as you go into a choke point, like the Straits of Malacca down at the bottom where Singapore is, okay, you can see all the lines, okay? There's all kinds of lines. People have claims, okay? The Chinese have a huge, what we say is an exaggerated claim to what they call the 9-dash line. And, the 9-dash line essentially says the South China Sea, it's all ours. Okay, and you can see there's a part there that hangs down underneath where it says China there, called Hainan. Well, Hainan Island is a big submarine base, okay? And I don't have to tell you, that is a threat, okay? When they can operate submarines that close to the South China Sea, and of course, if you're gonna go to the Indian Ocean, that's where you go. You go through the Straits of Malacca, okay, which is like a huge funnel, okay, of shipping that goes down. You can actually find videos, live videos, because most of the merchant ships have transmitters on. You can actually watch the procession that goes down through there. But all that area, Vietnam has claim, Indonesia has claim, Philippines have claim, and that's a couple of the photos called Second Thomas Shoals, where that old U.S. destroyer, I think it's an LSD, landing ship, they keep manning that up because it sits on a reef, and that reef is disputed, and the Chinese use their militias and their Coast Guard and all that to try to prevent reinforcement, taking food out to the Marines who are out there claiming that island. On the left, at the bottom, you can see one of the islands there they've reinforced. They've actually gone in with huge construction battalions and things like that and made militarized it. That started probably late 2000s, 2008, 9. But when we deployed there on Ronald Reagan, you really have to feed your way out through there, okay? But it's a complicated area. And you can see the map of Taiwan there, and you see where the circles are. And those are Taiwanese islands, and they're like 3 miles off the coast of China. And within the last month, we've admitted that we actually put special forces out there. Okay, of course, you can imagine the response to that close to the Chinese mainland. Okay? So we're not idle. And underneath the Taiwan, you can see some of the islands are heavily fortified. So not an easy target. So when you talk about strategic issues, okay, as a naval person, I go right to that in the upper right-hand side. Those are what we call the 2 island chains. The first island chain, the second island chain, and you hear that in literature and in articles and things like that. And when the United States talks about containing China, we talk about the island chains. And do you let them out, or do you try to bottle them up? Because it's pretty tight in there. And I can tell you, talk about Taiwan Straits, okay? The Taiwan Straits, we went through there in the late 90s. And this leads to the third Taiwan Straits crisis that I talk about in my little bio there. We went into Hong Kong for a port visit, and this is before the turnover from the Brits, which was 1997, all right? So we went in routine, pull in, Christmas, whatever, okay? And the weather was terrible out there, okay? Big storms, everything. So we ducked in behind. This is a USS Nimitz carrier striker. And the commander lives down near Aberdeen, South Dakota, by the way. And I talked to him on and off. I was just a destroyer. I was a skipper of a destroyer. But bad weather, really bad weather. So we duck in behind Taiwan to get out of the weather. Fine. Went into Hong Kong for a port visit and everything like that. Left, went to the Persian Gulf. Didn't hear anything. Like 2 months later, a big hoopla. They realized we went through the Taiwan Straits. This is 1996, okay? I mean, they never said anything about it, and all of a sudden, it's a big deal. So we go and do our deployment, and then the Taiwan elections came up in April of 1996, and the Chinese started shooting missiles, trying to intimidate the voters. Well, so there we're sitting in the Persian Gulf, and we're doing our normal operations and things like that, and we're getting ready to go to a port visit in Dubai. And my boss calls and said, hey, that port visit you're going in Dubai? Oh, you're not, okay? In fact, you're heading down to the Taiwan Straits. And so we all fueled up and headed toward the Taiwan Straits with the Nimitz behind. They didn't have things to do. But the small boys, the little ships, okay, we went on down to Taiwan Straits. We actually didn't go to the Taiwan Straits. That's where the crisis was. So you wound up, at the end, when the elections were coming, you had the USS Independence, which was home ported in Japan, on the north side, and we were on the south side, almost back up to the Philippines. Okay? But the point is, that's the first time when I actually sat out and looked at the Chinese naval order battle to see just what they got there, just in case we had to do something. That's the first time I ever looked at it. I mean, they literally were not a factor. And as Mr. Norquest showed you on their defense spending, okay, we just weren't really paying a lot of attention to them. we were doing our business wherever we needed to do. And he mentioned the fact that our strategy was two major regional conflicts, one after the other. Okay? Of course, we had an abbreviation for that too, MRC, we've got MRC. Well, serious stuff. And so I was worried about that. What happens if you have more than one? So, so in the end, the other thing there is what's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Right? Shanghai Operation. That's China and Russia, and it's starting to become the BRICS. And that's all the interior vision. So here's some economic data for you on China, okay? And as you'll see, and I know people in North Dakota are familiar with this issue, China dominates rare earths, critical minerals, okay? I mean, you can see one of their mines there, right? They have improved their high-speed rail over the last 10 years. You get a sense of it, the size of the network there. I mean, they literally took like the French high-speed train, and you can get around very, very easily now. Their debt to GDP ratio is 77%. Okay, so ours is a little higher. They're the second largest economy, second in military expenditures, and as Mr. Norquest said, and they're rising. I mean, I personally date that to the Taiwan, that missile crisis over those elections in '96, because we literally faced them down. And of course, if you've ever been to Asia, you know that people don't take kindly to losing face. They don't take kindly. And the other thing is, 113 cities, over 1 million in population. I mean, it's really something. You can see their largest cities there. So, partnership without limits, okay, that's pretty new. Pretty new. I talked to one of my mentors, worked for Henry Kissinger, and he said the top of our strategic to-do list was to prevent that from happening. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why President Nixon went there, was to try to not have that happen. They're a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS, and they set up a bank. They set up a bank there in Shanghai. First president is the former president of Brazil. And they're working with the BRICS. Okay, so there's an economic element under there that we are paying attention to. So whether you think they're in trouble over there, whether you think they've had a pretty meteoric rise. I mean, but from my view, having watched it in 1996, we've had a lot of warning. When I was president of the Naval War College, we gained a lot of things about China. And what we found was the rules weren't the same as they were with the Russians. Because despite the fact that they were our adversaries, we had a lot of agreements with them. We had incidents to sea agreements. So if we got into shouldering with ships and things like that, we knew that there would be accountability, and so we tried not to do that. So the first, and this is my last couple of slides. There's a saw, an old saw that says the Chinese characters for crisis are danger and opportunity. But it means danger, perilous, and change point. Okay, that's their word for crisis. And it's just an interesting thing. As you can see, so war is mysterious. Well, hey, the first person I knew that said that was clear back in the 1800s, okay, was von Clausewitz. He's the guy who coined the term fog of war. Okay, we studied Clausewitz extensively. We made General Letton read that, okay, extensively. And then, I'm not here to predict the future, but Geoffrey Blaney, who wrote The Causes of War, okay, he has a whole chapter on the mystery of why the wars and how they actually occur when you realize you're heading into war. And then people try to predict the war, okay? In the middle there is Hector Bywater, who wrote the Great Pacific War in 1925. He got a lot of it right, actually, but not all of it, okay? And as you can see, Admiral Stavridis, who I know well, he's written a couple here, 2034 and 2054, and David Poyer is an author I know. So, the thing is, it is not necessarily clear how this would all unfold. So, there's a lot we don't know and can't predict. Okay, now the photo there is a guy named Bradley Fisk. Bradley Fisk, and this will go to some of the comments you've heard earlier. He wrote a book called The Navy as a Fighting Machine back in 1916. And he talked about effective skill. You've heard our speakers talk about our non-commissioned officers and how they take initiative and how they do things. And he made a definition of effective skill, and it had to do with how well the commanders knew how to use their machines and how to use their tools. Okay, a famous Air Force guy who knew said it's people, ideas, and machines in that order. Okay, people. So important. I had a Russian admiral ask me, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you develop these petty officers? We used to take him up on the flight deck of Ronald Reagan and show him, hey, this guy, average age on Ronald Reagan, 19. Okay? I was 55. Okay? I was literally the old man on board. Okay? But we would take guests everywhere we went. And we'd bring them up on the flight deck to watch this, and they were just agog. They were just marvel. So the characters there, okay, are Zhuang Wu. What does that mean? That's China. That's how they say it. You've heard about the Middle Kingdom. The history is long, okay, millennia. But that's how they refer to themselves, okay, as China. The other thing is, I know, because I watched them at the Naval War College. They were guests at the Naval War College, but we didn't have any students from the PRC. But they all studied out with Thayer Mahan, okay? They all studied, because we still have Mahan's desk at the museum in the Naval War College, and they all made a pilgrimage to see that desk. And so we know that they studied. Now you'll see up in the left-hand corner is unrestricted warfare. The rules aren't the same. This was written in 1999. These two colonels, okay, the Chinese and the military actually, they predicted 9/11. Okay, they predicted that we would have some kind of a problem like that. Of course, they patted themselves on the back. But the real thing that came out of that was that we don't know all the things they may be capable of. All different kinds of warfare. It's not just military. And I think we've seen some of that. And the red book there comes out of the Naval War College, China Maritime Studies Institute. You can find them online, okay? It's all unclassified. It's all pulled from original sources. We have about a half a dozen really smart people, PhDs and all, who read Mandarin, speak Mandarin, they go there and everything, and they write these reports. And the title of that one is No Substitute for Experience. Because their first long-range deployment of ships and things like that was to the pirate business in the Gulf of Aden in 2014. Well, my money's on the U.S. Navy, okay, and on the United States, okay. We have a lot more experience in that, and we know what to do. So, with that, I have one last thing, okay. This is Latin, and what it means is it all comes down to the Triad. Now, the Romans had the veterans, okay? Veterans like these guys sitting in front, people who were experienced and knew what to do. And they actually didn't fight in every battle, okay? But if things started getting tough, right, the common phrase was, it all comes down to the Triad, because these were people who, they knew how to win, okay? They knew how to win. And that's something that I don't have to tell people here in Minot, North Dakota, or my friends in the Air Force here, because you are the Triad. We count on all of it. And so thanks very much for having me. I'll take a few questions if we've got time, but I know we're right on the edge. So let me show you one other thing here, okay? It's not bad for that slide. So I got a couple backup slides. This is Reagan and Guam, okay? But here's the slide I wanted to tell you about with Cheju, okay, an island. You can see how far things are, and they just built this period spec. It's incredible. There are two of them. Here's the critical mineral slide, okay. That's a north-south transit corridor, okay. So you've got the Belt Road, you know, that connects China with Europe now by rail, and this connects India with St. Petersburg, and this is an operation. So here's my point. This is my strategic point, okay, about the heartland. It goes across the mainland of the Asian continent. I'm not the first person to think of this, but all that, when you see things that are happening, just keep your eye on it. That's 1904, by the way. And the China Maritime Studies Institute, a plug for Andrew Erickson, okay, who's one of our analysts there. That you can have access to his work. It's all online. It's all online. And just in case, and there's the difference. So, that's all I got. Any questions? Okay.